Welcome, Built on Air community. We're glad to be with you today for today's live show of the podcast. It is me, Dan Fellers, founder of OnAir and OpenSide and primary sponsor of Built on Air. Today I'm flying solo just for a little bit. We should get Camille on shortly. She is sitting in Los Angeles traffic and should be arriving to her location shortly and will be joining us. Ali is not with us today again, still recovering from wedding and honeymoon and catching up on everything, but she should be with us next time. So for now, we're going to start and get going. We are a live show, so we're got to keep the show going, as they say. And so we will begin. Built on Air podcast is a weekly live show where we talk about all things Airtable, see what's going on in the community. We always do 4 different segments where we'll highlight different aspects of using Airtable to run your business. So we're glad you could join us and view today's episode. As always, we begin with round the bases. And this is our opportunity to look to see what's going on in the different communities, talk about any updates. We're mid-month, so there isn't any monthly announcements from Airtable of what's going on. But there are some new things that are being talked about that we'll go over. This first one is a question about running scripts through the Airtable API. So they're asking if you can perform a script or an automation by using the API. And as Kavan mentioned, there is nothing specific about running scripts via their API resource. But as Bill mentioned, there is a way where you can use the webhook functionality and be able to use that as a way to be able to call that, and that will perform an automation. So for automations, you're able to trigger them off of a webhook, which is a URL that they will provide when you use that as your starting trigger. And then you simply just call that from your code or other system that you might be using to be able to perform that. So Bill mentioned a nice way where you actually can perform automations, and automations can then perform scripts. So there is a way where you can trigger an automation off of a webhook and then get it going off of that. So it's a nice workaround if you ever are trying to automate things from an external platform. That is a way where you can automate an automation and go through there via the webhook. This next one is an interesting one. The question was posed regarding a front-end builder release. And so there was mention of it in different podcasts. Our friend Ben Green on his podcast talked about it. And other people reference that they've actually seen snippets of it through different podcasts or webcasts that Airtable employees have done, where they've kind of given a sneak peek of what this front end UI might look like. And so when Camille gets on, I'll ask her opinion about this one. So we might revisit this one, but just very curious to see, anytime Airtable can highlight any information about what might be coming, we're always on top of that to see what it could look like. So the gist of what people are mentioning is that it might be some sort of application builder similar to a Bubble or some other type of app that are popular out there. Retool is another one. So that's kind of probably more what I think it might look like. Some kind of UI builder that allows you to build custom apps off of a GUI and be able to implement that. So this was very interesting, one that we'll keep our eye on. Somebody actually pinged a member of the team at Airtable to get their input, and Jordan has not responded. So it's something that I think they're still keeping under tight lips and not sharing too much information on. But if we hear anything, we'll definitely share it with our community, and something that we'll be watching closely as it develops, if at all. This was one where 5 days ago, if you had any issues dealing with your scripts and they suddenly stopped working or generating errors, it appears they had an outage. And so a lot of people mentioned that they had issues, even just a very basic script, so it wasn't code related. One of the things that's a challenge is knowing if it's an issue on your end or an issue on Airtable's end. So that this appears to have been an issue with Airtable. They must have pushed some kind of update with the scripting block and had issues there. So as Kavan mentioned, they did notice the community about this issue, this incident. If you go to status.airtable.com, you can see information about what's going on with different incidents and things of that nature. So it was a Airtable issue. So if you were pulling your hair out trying to figure out what code bug was the issue, it wasn't your fault. So moving on, next thing. This is a big one that they just announced yesterday about a new scripting API. So being able to select records by the record ID. So I think this is a great step forward. If you've done any scripting, you know that in order to retrieve a single record, you typically would have to pull in all the records and do a loop and do a find until you found the one that you wanted. So they've now added a function, and in the future, maybe next week or in the coming weeks, we'll do a scripting time segment where we talk about this and how it works. But essentially what it is the ability to just, if you already have the existing record ID, maybe you're using a trigger and it gives that record ID, you can now just simply retrieve that one single record. Or if you have multiple records, you can specify an array. So this will actually give you multiple items with an array of record IDs. And so this is great for using within automations or within scripts. It helps with the memory usage because now you don't have to load in all of your records, which there are memory limitations, especially on the automation side. So this will come in handy. I'm guessing the next phase of what they'll provide is the filter functionality, where you can perform a query to just retrieve a subset of the records based off of filter criteria. So this is an initial step to just get, if you already know the record IDs, to retrieve them and then process them as needed. So very useful. This will come in handy in many ways, and we'll explore its usage in the future on how to do it. And it looks like they're still working through the documentation and getting that all worked out, and it may not be fully phased out. So if you are trying to use this week and it's not quite working, then it may not be available yet in your base as they roll these out, on kind of a segmented effort. So feel free to play with that one and let us know your feedback there with that new API. All right, that was kind of it within the Airtable community, other than the standard questions, and we might dive into one of those in the future. But that was kind of the highlights of the Airtable community. Moving on to Reddit, a common question that gets asked is whether you can sell a base that you've created. And so you might have created a base and it's valuable, and you want to and you want to make a little bit of money off of the effort and time that you've put into that base. that's a common question of how can you monetize that. There is somebody posted in the Reddit community that they're actually building a product. So this paytable.io, definitely worth checking out. I have not personally used it, but it's definitely an interesting concept of how you can monetize your bases and get that. And it looks like they support Notion in addition. And you can actually, it provides the way to collect payments and then share that base with you. The challenge with sharing a base is that once somebody copies it, then they kind of have a replica of your base and whatnot. So it does become challenge. The other bigger challenge that's a frustration is that if you were to monetize a base, trying to get updates out to people that have already purchased your base is really not possible at this point. We'll talk actually in another segment on this episode, we'll talk about the meta APIs and how you can use those to potentially, auto create new tables and fields as you push them out, but it's not quite there yet. We'll talk about why that is in the next segment. But yeah, so I think this is still pretty early to as far as the maintenance side of managing existing bases and seeing it through. But for sure, if you just have an initial base that's pretty solid and you just want to get it up there, check out Paytable. I think that's a great idea. And as Airtable makes more underlying functionality come out, then I think we will see this area explode more of sharing your data and your structure and maintaining it going forward. So definitely one worth checking out. Next one from the Reddit community is linking records across bases. So I'll read this question. It says, our company keeps lists of talent we like working with, and those people are often duplicated on multiple lists. Is there a way to reflect all the lists that individuals show up on across tables? For instance, if I have a base with grid list of project A, B, C, and talent appears on A and C, is there a way to have the record for talent 1 in project A communicate with the record for talent 1 in project C? Ideally, I'd like to be able to set it up so that on a separate grid, I can look at talent 1 and see all the projects we are working with them on. So this is a perfect example of understanding a relational database, and people on this thread give great feedback. William, who is active on the Reddit community, gives a perfect layout of how you would do this using a relational database. And I see a lot of similarities between William and Bill French, but I know they're different people. I've met them both via Zoom, and both have been on our podcast in the past. And we now have Camille. Welcome, Camille.
Hi, I live in Los Angeles, and sometimes the rumors are true and traffic is awful.
Even early in the morning. So
yeah.
You're
Hi.
good. Welcome. So we're deep into Around the Bases, talking about, we've already been through the Airtable community, and we're now on to Reddit, talking about a good use case of understanding how relational databases work. And the question was, somebody has a list of talent that they were using, I'm assuming, as a drop down in multiple tables, but now they want to see that the value of that drop down. So essentially the answer is, don't use drop downs, create another table of your list of talent, and then you can link them to the different projects. And the projects could either be in the same table, and which would probably be the preference, and create views for your different projects. Or if it made sense to have them in different tables, you can still link them to the same person. And then from that person table, you can see all the links associated there. So William here, I was mentioning that for a second, I thought this was Bill French because of some of his terminology, but they're different people. I've met them both. So I do want to go back, Camille. I mentioned that there's a couple of these I want to get your input on. First was this new scripting API of using record IDs, being able to select just by a record ID.
Yeah.
What's your initial reaction to that?
I think it's useful in both cases, but in terms of the scripting app and automation scripts, I think it's especially useful for automation scripts because a lot of times you have your trigger being based on some change or some new record, and you already know exactly which record you want to deal with. But if you had a script involved in the automation, you would have to query every single record in the table first, and then filter out essentially the ID that you already know, and then you have the record object. This is much faster. If you already know which record you want to deal with, just start from there, and then if you have thousands of records in your table, I mean, you're wasting resources. So this is, super, super useful.
Yep.
I'm glad to see it.
Yep. Yeah. The thing that this helps with is I've done automations where, they trigger for each record, and I didn't want to have to query all the data for that record. So you'd have to pass them in as input parameters. So now this helps so that you don't have to pass all the data for that record in as input parameters. You can just pass in the one record ID and then query that one record, and then you can get the data from that instance instead of having to set up input parameters for each data element you wanted for that record.
Yeah.
So it comes in handy. Yep. All right. Why don't we move on? We will. Okay, so this was one on Twitter that I thought was interesting. So this person I actually know, she actually has a very popular community of her own and helps companies start up. And so she's pretty well respected, but she has a very different take on Airtable, and just basically states Airtable is so awkward. And so I thought this thread was interesting. Reading through it, not everybody loves Airtable the way that we do, which is always good to hear other people's perspective on what they don't like about it. And so the other comment was just good enough to make you imagine the things you actually want. I think there's some truth to that. There are definitely times where you get to a point where you're like, oh, if it could just do it this way, it would be so much easier. Other comments, other people come in and say, it's been great for me. Mobile app is fantastic. Although I think some people would argue with that comment. So then somebody made the comment that if you're just looking at it for the data itself without any kind of automations or scripts or apps, then it's pretty basic. But once you get that automation aspect of it going, then you see the power of it. This might show, where Amy's coming from. She just said, how is that better than having your own SQLite database? Most people probably don't even know what SQLite is.
Yeah, I mean, that tells me all I need to know. Who wants to sit there and make an SQLite database and make it good?
Yeah. So SQLite is kind of a standalone basic SQL database that you could run on your own. But it doesn't really have much of a UI. There are different UI builders, but very different.
I think her reply below that, worse than a spreadsheet meets worse than FileMaker, but together I think is a better sort of, peek into this particular viewpoint. Is like FileMaker lets you do anything and you build your own user interface on top of it. It's also like, I feel like it's more expensive when you look at it, just pure, like it costs more and the product is dying. So leaving that one alone. Yeah. It does have a lot more features and a lot more capability than Airtable does. And spreadsheets have like dozens more formulas than Airtable has, but they are different use cases. So you wouldn't use any really database that you would have used a spreadsheet for, or vice versa. Probably if you need a spreadsheet, you would use a spreadsheet. And if you need a database, you need a database. The FileMaker one is more interesting to me because FileMaker does have a great many number of features that Airtable doesn't. It's also much harder to learn and much more expensive and dying.
Yeah. And we know, people that come from that world talk about everybody moving from FileMaker to Airtable. So
yeah, I'm curious for the open source alternatives to Airtable, which are very similar, but have some of the missing kind of components that Airtable doesn't, like, infinite number of records is one of the ones that is most often in Airtable's direct sort of competitors in a similar space. Being able to host your own server, all of those kind of things that are improvements upon what Airtable provides, but still being in the same sort of space without being a completely different product.
Yeah, for sure. So anyways, it's interesting to see not everybody, it's different for everyone. I'm trying to remember, I believe Amy Hoy's business partner was one of the very early people to join our podcast. So I believe they've moved off of Airtable since then. It was a year or two ago, but I believe they've used it in their business. So interesting to see that reaction there. So not everybody is a fan of Airtable. That's okay. We can make it work, and we're trying to find, we're always looking for ways to overcome. For sure, it's got limitations and room for improvement, but in and of itself, I think it's a pretty good tool to use, which is why we're here. So any other things that you missed some of the other ones that we've talked about, but anything you want to highlight that's happening in the communities?
I'm gonna say no.
Okay. That's good. Yeah, it was there was only that one announcement from Airtable about that new feature. So nothing too pressing on that front. So for the rest of the episode, we're going to do, I'll do a spotlight on the primary sponsor, OnAir. Then I'll highlight an AppADay and also do some scripting time that will give you. Camille, do you have an audience question that you're going to do for us?
I do have it picked out. I just need to pull it up.
Okay, we'll give you time. So I'll take the next few segments and then get you time to get ready. So with that, we're now going to go to our spotlight on OnAir. It's the all-in-one toolkit to run your business. It's a suite of apps that help you do a variety of things, from backups to managing your schema to automating more things. Our latest push is in the Google Drive integration space, allowing you to automate document creation, populating your data into Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides, and converting them into end documents like PDFs and saving those back into Airtable. So the full suite of document management. For today's spotlight, I'm going to showcase one of our functions that is under our OnAir Actions app. And this is a common use case. I actually believe I saw this in the community, somebody asking about the ability to perform an upsert in an automation. And what is an upsert? An upsert is a merge. I don't think it's a real word, but if you're familiar with database nomenclature, it basically means it's a combination of update and insert. That's why you get upsert. So it's essentially combining the ability to update an existing record, and if that record doesn't exist, then creating a new record all in one step. And so that's what an upsert does. Now, what's interesting about OnAir Actions that it allows you to do, this is a sample use case of a customer and client of ours. And what we're doing is we're actually performing an upsert from two different bases that don't actually even reside in the same account. So we're actually moving data from one account into another account that don't even have any kind of relationship between them. The users can't see data in the other corresponding base. And so because of how OnAir is configured, you can actually have a connection to one base that is using an API key talking to one account, and that's your source base. and then you set up a trigger of when that data it changes in your source. So we're using a last modified date. You can also use when somebody checks a checkbox, or when a date expires, or a custom formula, or if you know the record ID, you could use that. So there's a variety of ways that you can set up your trigger when the data is updated. And then you can specify your destination, and you can actually use a different API key for your source and your destination. So we're actually using data from one API access and pushing it into data from another API access. And then you simply just specify what you want to do when it's trying to match data. You'll need to store some unique identifier. Maybe it's a name. Typically, I recommend using the record IDs because those are always unique. And then you just specify what you want to do each time. So the upsert allows you to update if there's a match, and then create if no match. You can also ignore if there's a match, or ignore creating a new one. So you just want to update, or only create new ones. So if it exists, then you want to ignore it. Or you can just always create a new record every time this runs. And then you simply set up the mapping between your source and your destination, the different fields. And then attachments, if you're doing attachments, you can override what's already in there or append to the existing attachment array. And with that, you can then move data from one base to another. And those bases don't even need to be in the same account. They can be, but they don't need to be. So that's a very common use case for managing data between bases, and easy to set up. You can actually install it to where it runs completely on our infrastructure. So you don't even need to set up an Airtable automation. You can have it run hourly or instantly, or however you want. Or if you do want to incorporate it into an Airtable automation, you can do that as well, or call it from an Airtable script if you're doing a script. So, or Zapier. So that is OnAir Actions. There's a whole library of different functions that you can run. This is just one of them. So check it out at ontoair.com. With that, we're going to go to AppADay. And I was looking at the different apps, and actually I had a use case with a customer the other day where they needed kind of a matrix view of two fields that they wanted to compare. And this is an app, Camille, I don't know how much you use the Matrix app, but it's one I knew existed, and I maybe tried it in the early days, but I haven't used it too much. But once I used it with the client, I realized this is a pretty cool app that I should use more often.
Yeah, I agree. It's pretty useful. It reminds me a lot of like a Kanban view, but with I think they're called swim lanes, where you have your vertical sort of groups, but now you also have the horizontal groups as well. So
yep. Yeah. So you basically set it up, and it actually does a good job of, it tries to guess two different fields that you can use. So it's one table that you're looking at. You can filter it down to a view if you want, and you just specify which field do you want for your row and which field do you want for your columns. And you can turn these little switches on so that it filters it and only shows you items where there's data in them. So there must be a value in the column or a value in the row for it to display. So it filters out any empty stuff. Or if you turn them off, then it will show you the empty ones. So for here, and then you can also color it. You can actually even, I haven't tried this one, but you can actually even like have a field that defines what color you want them to display. I think the view one will use the view. So that's kind of cool. The other cool thing is it has these plus to add a new record. And this makes it really easy to, like, if you were like a common use case would be like assigning people to jobs or projects, and you want to easily say, okay, this person's not working on any projects. I'm going to add them to this project. And when you click on the add new record, it brings up the editor, but you notice that it's already populated those two fields with the corresponding wherever that cell resides. And so it saves you that step of having to select the category and select the project lead. So very cool, very useful way for dealing with two-dimensional data that you want to see in this kind of format. So I think I'm going to be using this more often now that I've revisited it, and I'm thinking of more use cases I can find places for it.
Yeah.
All right. Why don't we, are you ready?
I am.
Okay. We're going to move you up and give you a chance to talk. So if you want to share your screen, we will do an audience question.
Is my screen being shared?
Not yet.
Whoops. Now is it being shared?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a question that was from last week, and it was essentially the type of question where you have two different fields that you want to look at. They wanted to use one field to determine how many days they wanted to add to another date. So in this case, they have the date, something that was quoted, and then depending on what type of shipping they had, determined how many days they want to add on to the quotation date to get this new delivery date or payment date. So I chose this question because one of the first sort of approaches to solving it involved a nested if statement. And when I was looking at this question, the first thing I thought of was a switch, because we are looking at the same field twice. So if shipping equals boat, then this. If shipping equals something else, then that. Since we're only looking at shipping, a switch statement is perfect. And so you don't really need a nested if statement. And the other thing I noticed was that if you have the same type of function that has varying inputs, you don't need to put the whole function, the complete function once, and then a complete function again with separate inputs. Like in this example where put in the whole date add function with a particular number of days, and then put it again with a different number of days added. You can actually write it much, much more simpler by having the date add once and then determining how many days in just one line. So again, I chose this question just to show that when you have a function like date add and the second argument, the second argument in a date add function is how many of the particular time unit you want to add or subtract. That can be a function itself. And so really what I wanted to get across is when you're writing formulas in Airtable or Excel or Sheets, they're all kind of similar in that if you feel like something could be simplified, you probably can simplify it. The notion in programming is don't repeat yourself or dry. If you find yourself repeating something a lot within one formula, there's a chance that you could condense it down.
Yeah, that is great. That's an awesome shortcut. There are times where it is a challenge. Like I wish there was some way where you could like store the value in a variable within that formula.
Variables would be great. And the unfortunate workaround would be to have a whole other field that calculates whatever that variable would be. And then you call it like you would a variable by just putting in the name of that field. But you have extra fields in your base now. And that is a drawback that there is a field limit for tables. I have never gotten even close to what that field limit is. I think it's in the hundreds.
I think it's 500.
Yeah, I've never gotten that close, but some people have. And so if you're hurting for space, or even if you just have too many fields to keep track of, that becomes unwieldy. And so improvements to be made. However, sometimes if it's something as simple as this, condense down. And use switches. Sometimes you don't need a nested if. Nested ifs are hard to keep track of in Airtable's formula builder since the window is so small.
Yeah, that's another area it could improve in. And the other thing I was thinking of, I had a use case with a customer of, it would be really nice if you could get the field name and use that in your formulas, because sometimes the field name could almost work like a variable.
I would agree. I can think of a couple of different instances where that might be super useful. Like if you're outputting, if the value of your formula results in either editor or author, for instance, if you could then say, all right, well, the answer is author, so pull from the author field instead of pull from the editor field. Like, you could do that, but that's a longer formula that you would have to write. It would be nice if it was something that you could just pull in based on the name of the field itself. That would be cool.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, in Google Sheets you can do that, and so that is useful. Mm-hmm. I've had to move Google Sheets over, and they were reliant on that. We had to figure out a different way to do that.
Yeah.
So very cool. All right, great way to showcase the power of optimizing. Yes, dry is a great principle. If you're getting into coding, that is one of the core principles I always tell people that are just learning how to program to follow that principle.
It is hard when you're first kind of starting out, because when you're, at least with me, when I'm learning something, repetition is helpful for me. If I write out something multiple times, I retain the information longer. But with dry, don't repeat yourself. You don't want to repeat yourself. You want to do it once the right way the first time. And then never do it again. So, I could look at some of my older scripts or some of my older apps and seeing how they can be just shortened and condensed. But it all sort of relates back to formulas. Either last year or the year before, I don't remember time anymore. At the Airtable user conference, Kavan had a great session where she talked about formulas being the gateway to all of those types of coding with Airtable. And I completely agree. Once you get really good at writing formulas in Airtable, scripting is just the next sort of step up. And you can hone sort of the key principles of coding while you're still doing formulas. And one of those principles is don't repeat yourself.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Camille. Mm-hmm. All right, before our last segment, just a quick one more. I might have said I'm not going to do this again, but I want to add my screen back. I want to give one more shout out. I'm leaving it open for one more week for anybody, any experts or power users that want to join the OpenSiders network. Camille and I are part of it, and along with 20 plus other people, we meet either 1 or 2 times a month and talk about kind of deeper dive into more technical, more advanced topics within Airtable. We'll often get people from Airtable or other outside people that are heavily involved in the ecosystem to come and give us demos or talk about what's going on. So highly recommend it for anybody that wants to get deeper into this world. If you're already doing consulting work within Airtable, we talk about how to get more business, how to improve your business, things of that nature. So check us out, contact me through OpenSide, and I'll give you the information that you need, or see our post in the Airtable community, or join the BuiltOnAir community. It's also posted in there as well in our Slack channel. Okay, for our final segment, scripting time. I mentioned last week that we were going to dive deep into meta APIs, and let's do that. So So one of the cool things about the Airtable is getting into is the ability to dynamically create tables and fields within your table and allow you to do that. You can now do that through the scripting API. Before, it was just available through the app developer environment. So now this makes it easy to do it through scripts. And so I'm going to walk through how you would do that and what it looks like. So the first thing that you can do is you can actually create new tables within your base. So that's done with the base.createTable async. This will be the name of the table, and then you give it an array of fields that will be added upon table creation to your table. So you give it the name, so this will be the label of the field, and then you specify the type. And one thing that is important to know is they don't support all field types yet. And this is actually a big hurdle until you can really take advantage of this Meta API. So as far as the fields that they do support you creating, it's this list here. I won't read them all, but the ones that they don't support is this list here. And so the big one is formula. Some of these other ones.
Any calculated field, right?
Let's see. Yeah, it looks like any calculated field.
I think it's all calculated fields.
Yeah, all calculated fields.
Which is, I get it for some of these. Formula, right. I understand because they have a particular formula language that they use, and what if you come up with an error or something?
Yeah,
it's fine. But auto number,
yeah.
Why? There's no settings.
Yeah, exactly.
That one is odd.
Yeah, exactly. Or even created by, last modified by. I mean, maybe the date formatting.
Some of these I feel like should be able to be created, and then maybe you don't edit the options, but I don't know. Auto number shouldn't be on that list.
Yep. I agree. But I think they made that kind of hard line of we'll only do updatable fields. So that's why, we at OnAir, we keep our eye closely on this because we have a schema app that allows you to manage or track all of your fields, and we're exploring how we can leverage the Meta API to help with automating creation of data. But really, I think it would be a frustrating experience of not being able to do these, because have you used any base that doesn't use these fields? I don't think I have.
No.
Yeah, so it would be tough to try to build some kind of automated solution that doesn't support these to try to, market that. I think people would get frustrated pretty quickly. So that's why we've held off until these are supported. But anyway, so if by chance you can survive without those needing to be auto created, and you're okay doing them manually, then this is the API to do that. So you can do all the fields at once. When you're creating a table, you have to have at least one field in your array because it needs a primary field. So it could just be a name field that's a single line text and whatnot there. So this is going to create a new field with a new table with two fields, a name and an email. And then it returns just the table ID. So if you want to do more to that table, you then need to get it from the base. Either you could actually get it from this table ID or the name. And I actually haven't run this yet, so I'm curious to see if this will work, because I'm curious to see if you can retrieve a table that you just created, or if there needs to be some kind of resync process happening. So I'll be curious to see what happens when we run this. Then the next thing is, this way is once you already have a table that's already created and you want to add fields to it, then based off of the table reference, you can use the create field async, And here you just pass in the name. So let me capitalize that. So the name will be phone, and then the type is phone number. And then the other way, if it's a single select field that has choices, then you can actually pass in those choices. So here this will be the selection in there, and you can actually also specify the color. Unfortunately, I could not find, let me see if they document the colors.
Oh, it's somewhere, but I don't think it's in here.
Yeah, it is in the app SDK documentation, but yeah, I don't know if it's in the scripting one. I couldn't find it.
For everyone's reference, they follow a somewhat predictable a color naming scheme. So there's the base colors, blue, yellow, orange, etc. And then each of them have dark one. They have light one, light two, and dark one, dark two.
Yeah. So if you just type in light, then the autocomplete will give you some choices.
Yeah, it's the color, light, dark, bright. Those are the four sort of variants, and then there's two types of light. So just so you know, if you had to guess what the correct color would be, guess one of those. The color name, either bright, light, or dark, or nothing. And then one or two at the end, and then you could probably.
Interesting. It's only given the light ones in the autocomplete,
but not well. Dark is one. I'm pretty sure. I think
that dark isn't showing up.
Oh no, am I wrong?
I think you're right, but I wonder maybe they're not exposed in the scripting.
That's strange.
Yeah. So we'll do So only light is coming in the autocomplete. So we can do that. So that's how you would add new fields, and if it has choices, so like a single select or a multi-select, you just pass in this choices object that's an array. And then if you ever needed to update that, this is interesting. You can't just add one additional one if you want to update it. Anytime you update it, you have to give the full list. So one way to do that, and this comes from their documentation, is just to grab the existing list of choices from your field. And this ... that's called a spread operator that basically extracts all those choice values and inserts them into here. So it's kind of a shortcut way to put all of those in there. So this will get all the existing one and then add a new one after those existing ones. So this is the logic for just adding one new one, but you need to make sure that you get all the previous ones, because without that, then it will change your array to just be one selection item, and it will delete the previous ones in there.
Yes. This is a concept that's throughout sort of Airtable and JavaScript in general. Is if you're updating an array, if you want to include the existing items of the array, you have to declare that first, and then you add the stuff at the end. You also need to spread your original options, like you said, with the 3 dots at the front. If you didn't have those 3 dots, you would be passing as an array item another array. So Airtable wouldn't be able to read that.
Yep.
Just there's a lot. there's a lot in here, but it's the same with like adding something in an automation. Like if you wanted to append a new multi-select item to some record that already had a few things selected, you have to pass in what it already had selected and then the new thing at the end. So this is just a concept that's everywhere in Airtable.
Yeah, and if you're wondering about this squiggly line, check out last week's episode. We talk about why that is. And I saw this earlier. This one takes a little bit more effort. Actually requires 2 question marks to get rid of the squiggly line. So check out last week's episode. We explain those issues, why they complain about that. Okay, let's run this. Let's see if it works. So we should create a new table. It will have 2 initial fields, and then we're going to add a 3rd field and then a 4th field and it should end up with 3 choices, type A, type B, and then new choice. So everything runs smoothly. Let me do this so we can see it get created. There's our people. Yeah, I didn't put any console.log. And we have our email, our phone. I guess I didn't capitalize this, and we have type A, type B, and new choice. So it ran, and we got our colors in there. Blue, red. I didn't specify a color for that one. So we successfully created a new table with 4 fields and different field types.
Yay.
All right.
Have you attempted a multiple record link, creating a table with that type of field declared first?
That's right, because you can do that now, huh?
You can. For reference, my newest app, Junction Assistant, does this, where it allows you to create a new table. And the whole point is that it only really deals with multiple record link type fields. If you create a new table and in the process of creation add multiple record links at the same time, Airtable hates that. So what the app actually does is it creates the table first, waits for the table to be in existence, and then it adds the fields to the new table, and not like you have up at the top where you create the table with certain fields in place already. Yeah, I don't know if you can do that in scripting, because scripting is all asynchronous. So maybe it's not a problem there, but for everyone's reference, if you wanted to peek behind the curtain, that's how Junction Assistant does it.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you can't add them to this initial list.
I don't know. You can't do it in apps unless you make the entire app, I think, asynchronous. So I'm curious to see.
But you're doing it with. Does the link go to a previously existing table, or
yes.
is it?
So all of the tables that you're selecting exist already. The table that you're creating, of course, is brand new. But yeah. I was running into. I think the problem was when you create inter-table record links, you're adding a field not just to your table that you're looking at, you're adding a reverse link to the other table. So I think the error that it was running into was in the existing tables, it was trying to create a link to a table that didn't exist yet. So I think that's why it had to be done. I'm not sure if you can do it in scripting. You can add a new field to an existing table that is a multiple record link field. I don't know if you can create a table with a multiple record link field declared.
Yeah.
I haven't tested it.
Let's try
it. I genuinely don't know. I have my suspicions that it would run into an issue.
Oh, but we got to do this on a new one. Yeah. Okay. This will be our link. Type will be multiple record links. And our
object, yeah.
So is it this? This, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we're creating a new link test, and we have a link that points to this result table. Let's close out. Let's give it a try. It worked.
Okay. Asynchronous.
There we go. Yeah,
Good to
that's the
know.
difference. Yeah, yeah. So, okay, very cool. So you can do this in scripting. If you're doing any app development, then that scenario won't work.
There's ways around it. I just didn't go with that option. The wait for the table to be made and then add the fields later.
Right.
Is you run into less errors that way anyway.
Yeah.
But it is good to know that you can do it without any sort of workaround within the scripting environment, and that took you about 2 minutes to test. So very quick.
Very cool. So definitely powerful. Like I said, once they get the full breadth of field, it will be a complete game changer of what you could do. So anxiously awaiting that. So that concludes today's episode. Thanks. Glad, Camille, you could make it. And everybody out there, glad you could join us. Feel free to give your feedback. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and join us next week. Until then, we hope you enjoy what you build on air. Take care.